On certain days, life can be challenging, and you may find yourself wanting to yell at everyone in your immediate vicinity. You are familiar with the ones I am referring to. When you suddenly open your eyes, you realize that you are running late because you have pressed the snooze button an excessive number of times. When you rush out the door, the rest of the day continues to be a struggle against the odds. To put it simply, that was how my day began. The situation then became even more dire. Much more severe. When it came to an end, Gillian and I had been married for a little under 5 years at that point. At a barbecue, we were introduced to one another by mutual friends, and we hit it off right away. I learned the story from Gillian and her friends, and they told me that she had recently gone through a difficult breakup with her long-term boyfriend. They believed that I was a pretty good-looking single guy who could be there for her that they were looking for. To begin, I was apprehensive. It was not my intention to be the boyfriend who came back. Over the course of a few months, however, our mutual friends continued to bring us together, and as a result, we developed a friendship with one another. I finally worked up the courage to ask her out on a date after we had been together for 6 months, and a little more than 2 years after that, I asked Gillian to be my wife. Upon hearing that she had accepted my proposal, I was overjoyed. When I was younger, I believed that I could sell the air that Gillian breathed because I loved her so much. However, that is not the case anymore. "Greg," Gillian asked me as I was polishing my shoes for our outing tonight, "should I go for the black or the beige heels tonight?" I was getting ready to go out with my friends. That's me, Gregory, an all-around good guy, a hard-working accountant with his own practice, and I'm now feeling like the largest sucker the world has seen. "You look good in both," I told her, "but the black heels accentuate your calves a lot more. They will turn a lot more heads." Despite the fact that Gillian had a very poor sense of style most of the time, she enjoyed dressing up and looked good when she did it correctly. To put it simply, she was incapable of combining different colors, styles, and shapes. This was one of the qualities that I admired most about her. I had the opportunity to make her look good, and she was always asking for my advice. It had been a challenging day at work, other than the fact that I had gotten a late start to the day. We were conducting a couple of audits for a large multinational corporation for which we were responsible. The information that was being provided was both inaccurate and delayed. The majority of the errors were completely harmless, however, a few of the most recent spreadsheets that were being examined appeared to be incorrect. In the course of the day, my team and I spent our time sorting through data and comparing ledgers. Some of the strange and wonderful things that managers were attempting to get through to us were causing us to become increasingly frustrated. Trips to strip clubs and, in some instances, hookers were included in this category. There were also people who attempted to get narcotics approved as a legitimate business expense, and we had a lot of trouble with them. The process of going through this audit, in addition to the fact that this particular Friday was filled with spreadsheet problems, left me feeling exhausted and frustrated. Gillian had been ecstatic and bubbly throughout the entire week, and she was gushing about the reunion that was going to take place tonight. The fact that she never paid any attention to my exhaustion was a source of frustration for me throughout the entire week. In the past, when I was in the midst of a challenging week similar to the one I am currently experiencing, Gillian would have made the effort to listen to me, showing compassion and almost always showing a little bit of love in order to lift my spirits. This week, however, she was so preoccupied with the reunion event that I felt like I was causing her a great deal of inconvenience. I would not say that I enjoyed the sensation for the first time since we had first laid eyes on each other. However, she was my wife, and whenever she was happy about something, I made an effort to be happy for her regardless of how I felt about it. It was a reunion for her high school year that took place tonight. It was not an official event that was hosted by the school, rather, it was something that was organized by a majority of the students in the class. In order to host their graduating class and their partners, they had first rented a restaurant, and then they had reserved a private section of a club. I went with Gillian the year before, and I must confess that after I was introduced as Gillian's husband, I received a few strange looks. Despite this, I had a good time. I accompanied Gillian. During this particular year, I was not all that excited about it. As I mentioned earlier, it had been a terrible week, However, in response to my wife's enthusiasm and as a potential escape from my difficult audit week, I took a shower and shaved without making any complaints, put on my best suit, and styled my hair. I worked hard to shake the week off of me so that I could be the happy sidekick to my wife. At the very moment that we arrived at the restaurant, I had the distinct impression that something was lacking. I was left standing pretty much by myself after Gillian was left behind by several of the girls from her class. Gillian was taken away by them almost immediately. During dinner, we were seated with our friends Elle and Mark, who had introduced us to each other. I was largely excluded from the conversation, with the exception of the occasional question that I asked. But I noticed that Gillian rarely spoke to me, and a number of people, including Lena and Mark, kept looking at me with looks that were not exactly comforting. Gillian continued to act like her happy, bubbly self, but I noticed that she rarely spoke to me. Lena and Gillian vanished into the bathroom as dinner was coming to a close, and they remained absent for a considerable amount of time. At the same time, everyone was ending their conversation in order to go to the club for a few more drinks and to continue dancing. "What's going on, Mark?" I asked my friend with caution as I approached him after Gillian and Lena had not returned after a period of time had passed between their departures. After I tapped him on the shoulder, Mark was slightly taken aback and said, "I'm sorry, Greg." "I'm not sure what you mean," he said. "I need more clarification." He was met with a look of disbelief from me. I swear, I halted as I noticed Lena coming back, but my wife was not there to accompany her. "Mark, I swear." When she saw me looking at her, she quickly grabbed the hand of her husband. I asked with a note of concern rising in my voice, "Come on, Mark, Lena, where is Gillian?" The question carried with it. A momentary pause occurred for Lena. First, she looked at Mark, and then she looked at the fake houseplants that were scattered throughout the restaurant. After that, she looked at the fake houseplants. I could see her trying to figure out how to tell me something that she didn't want to tell me for a brief moment. "I'm sorry, Gregory. We got caught up with a group, and she is catching a lift to the club with them without telling her husband," Lena finally said. "But I'm sorry." When I asked, "What?" I could hear a hint of rage rising in my voice. "Lena, Mark, what aren't you telling me?" I asked with curiosity. Both of them were unable to look at me directly. I stormed out of the restaurant without uttering a single word, got into my car, and drove to the club where everyone was going to meet after everyone else had left. Although it was a 10-minute drive, I arrived in just 5 minutes. Upon entering the room, I was able to observe it. Gillian, my wife, was dancing with a guy, and his hands were all over her hips. However, the way that she was melding to him gave me the impression that this was not the first time that something like this had occurred. My life was slipping away from me as I watched it happen. Those who had attended the reunion began to congregate around me. As I stood just inside the entrance to the club, I could feel the looks of pity that people were giving me, but no one really said anything. I do not know how long I stood there watching them dance, but they never paid any attention to me while they were doing it. When I felt someone's hand touch my shoulder, I remained standing there. I was taken aback by the touch, and I turned around so abruptly that I came dangerously close to hitting Lena in the face. "It's Gillian's first love, Troy," Lena confirmed in a resolute manner. It was impossible for me to determine whether she was happy, sad, angry, or disappointed. They pretty much grew up together in the same preschool, best friends through primary school, and they dated all the way through high school. We all thought they would be together forever until he got a scholarship to a university in the States, and they broke up. The name of the pig was now familiar to me. I had a good understanding of the history. When he left, Gillian was going through a lot of rejection, and I had helped her get through a lot of it myself. "I don't think they appear to be very broken up," I murmured to myself. "He's been back for a few months now, transferred in with the company he works for," Lena told me without showing any trace of emotion. To return to the dance floor, I turned around. Dance was still going on between Gillian and Troy. In the meantime, Lena continued to talk while looking at them, and Mark was standing behind the two of us. "According to Lena, they are meant to be together, Greg," she said, displaying the first hint of emotion in her voice. To me, it was as if she were a physician informing me that I had a terminal form of cancer. Neither of us spoke. I mean, Gillian was so devastated when they broke up. She loved him so much. We never thought that she would meet anyone else. But then you met, and it came together. Lena was attempting to provide an explanation. As soon as the song came to an end, I began to contract my fist. While we watched, Troy leaned in close to my wife, cupped her face, and kissed her tenderly. The blood from my palm was drawn out by my fingernails. It was almost as if the spell that had been enchanted between them was broken when the first drop of blood fell from my palm and hit the ground. While Gillian was looking around the club at the people who were entering, her eyes collided with mine. It was with a gentle touch of hands that she parted ways with Troy and began walking in my direction. It never occurred to me that Mark and Lena would leave. It was as if there was no history between us when she approached me like there was. Troy was my first love, Greg. We gave each other our virginities, Gillian said to me without greeting me. We gave each other our virginities. She simply dove headfirst into the situation, as if I were going to follow her. I went completely still, like a statue. It was the first time I had spoken since leaving the restaurant that I made a sarcastic remark. When he moved for his scholarship, we always said that we would reconnect when he moved home. I guess he moved home, and you reconnected, I said. Gillian reprimanded me, saying, "Don't be like that, Greg." Troy began to say, "I get that this is going to be difficult for you, but Troy and I are meant to be together." Meant to be, but then he stopped. The words "Jill and Troy, you married me," came out of my mouth. Because of her bravery, I will give her points. She never averted her gaze. "I'm sorry, Greg. I really am, but we're going to need to divorce. I mean, Troy and I, we're going to get married and have kids, and what the hell, was I just your warm placeholder for the past several years?" I was close to screaming at this point. The bouncers were looking at us, but they did not move from their positions. A few of the people around us were staring at us. On the other hand, I noticed Loverby approaching us from the vicinity. She came to a halt and said, "Greg, you were never. Look, Greg, I do love you. It's just, you're not Troy. The love that you and I share is nothing compared to what Troy and I have," she stated in response. While I watched, Troy took the final dozen steps to get to us and put his arm around Gillian. He had a frown on his face the entire time. It was with a phony expression of concern on his face that he inquired, "I take it you're Greg?" My response was angrily, "That's Gregory to you, ***, and I was angry. He indicated with a nod. It was then that he said, "Okay, hostility, I get that." The expression on my face indicated that I was completely unaware of what he was saying. "You're upset because I'm taking your wife. She's going to divorce you, and we've been sleeping together since I got back," he said after pausing for a moment. When Gillian heard him say it, she became as pale as a sheet. She must have been holding out hope that it would not be revealed. Due to the fact that Troy was unfamiliar with me, he pushed Gillian behind him and assumed a defensive stance as soon as he realized what he had written. "Look, Gregory," he said, attempting to sound reasonable and accommodating. "I'm sorry you found out this way, but perhaps it's for the best. Gillian tells me you have been a great husband, the friend that I couldn't be while away. It would be good if we could all be friends. I mean, we all share several of the same friend groups." I said, not for long, while maintaining eye contact with Gillian. I momentarily turned my attention back to Troy. Because he was so eager to say something, I spoke up before he could give me a response. After removing as much feeling as I could from my voice, I said, "So let me get this right," and I meant it. I was keeping my anger buried for the time being, despite the fact that it was growing by the second. To my astonishment, the music suddenly stopped playing at that precise moment, and my voice was able to be heard clearly throughout the entire room. The fact that everyone turned their attention to us, including the DJ who never started the next song, is evidence that the little show was successful in capturing everyone's attention. "You two believe you have true love, screw like bunnies all through school, then break up because Troy moves to another country. But while Gillian is mourning and grieving, she meets me, supposedly falls in love, and marries me. While we are happy for several years, they nod cautiously, and you can hear a pin drop. Then true love strikes again when Romeo comes back into the country, and you two start screwing like bunnies again behind my back. Obviously, all our friends know, judging from the looks I got all night tonight, and this all culminates in this conversation of my supposed best friend tearing my heart out and holding it high in the air so everyone here can see in one of the most humiliating ways possible. Gillian began to say, "Greg, it wasn't supposed to be," but she stopped herself. My response was to yell out, "It wasn't supposed to be like what?" But no one moved in response. All week, you have been bouncing around but ignoring me despite my rough week. You demanded we both attend tonight, then you abandon me the moment we walk in the door. You disrespect me in front of our supposed friends and even leave the restaurant without even talking to me so that I would find you here sucking the tonsils off this prick. Troy attempted to communicate with me. I gave him a glare. I snapped, "Don't say a word, Romeo," and I growled. I tried to take control of the conversation by saying to Troy, "Your true love has demonstrated that she is a woman who lacks faith. You say that you have been cheating for the past 3 months because you are one of the real romances. Screw off. I get it, there are a lot of emotions flying around right now, but Gillian and I are destined to be together. We're sorry you're hurt and you found out we've been sleeping together, but Gillian loves me, and we're going to get married. Naturally, you and she are going to need to divorce," said Troy in response. Deadpan was my response. "Look, Greg," Gillian said, "I'm sorry, but we figured this was the best way. It would be a quick rip of the Band-Aid. We know it will hurt, but it's best for everyone." She paused, looking at me, and attempting to determine how I was feeling. Despite the fact that she had been my wife and my closest friend for the past few years, I had managed to maintain an open relationship with her. Her perception of me was never that I was a closed book. My response was, "Gillian, it's Gregory, not Greg," and I did so. She took a swallow. "Look, Gregory," she said, "I know this is hurting right now, but it's for the best. We're all still young, you'll find someone else." My eye twitched, and that small bit of emotion caused her to become even paler. "I know this is hurting right now." There is still no sound coming from the other side of the room. The fact that Troy cleared his throat indicates that he must have noticed. I smiled this time, and half of the people in the room looked at me with a questioning expression. "Look, Gregory, I know this is a lot to take, but I think it's best you leave. Everyone here knows Gillian and I are supposed to be together, and I unfortunately think you'd be a third wheel." In response, he smiled and said, "On that, we agree," as if he thought I might be understanding. "Good, well, as it's out in the open now, Gillian and I will keep away from your place over the weekend and even next week so you can move out." I cocked my head to the side and asked, "Move out of the person?" Troy downed his food. According to him, well, it's Gillian's house as well. "I see," I said, my eyes narrowing as I did so. "Gregory," my soon-to-be ex-wife said, struggling to make the transition to using my full name after so long, "we thought it would be easier for you to move out. The house is perfect for Troy and me to have children in, and we figure it's too large for you, so we would sort something out." "I see," I said, repeating what had been said. In the final syllable, the sound was reminiscent of a snake beginning to hiss. Nobody spoke for a brief period of time, and the silence continued for a considerable amount of time until the DJ decided that it was a good time to begin playing music. There was no one who started dancing as soon as the music started playing. Everyone in the room continued to keep a watchful eye on them to see what would take place. The music was drowned out by Troy's loud voice. On the other hand, he extended his hand and said, "I'm sorry, Gregory, but that's how it is. I know you might not think so right now, but there are no hard feelings." Immediately after I looked down at his hand, I returned my attention to his eyes, and the look caused him to quickly pull back his hand. If he had been able to see what was going on inside my head, he would have witnessed me cutting off that hand with the sharpest tool that was available to me, and then I would have pushed the severed limb through a particular opening. I came to the conclusion that it was time for me to leave, so I turned around and walked out of the room. Nobody was able to stop me. I was standing in front of the door when both of the bouncers on the door opened their doors and walked out. One of the guys asked, "You okay, man?" as the doors shut and the noise from inside the building became quiet. Additionally, they had been present during the event. "No, not really, but that's, I suppose, anyone that just had that handed to them," I said without further explanation. For the first time in the entire day, I found myself laughing out loud. "You know," the other bouncer said, "if you wanted to go back and give that dickwad a couple of hits, we could wait a few minutes before pulling you off." The two bouncers shared a grin. Both of them nodded, despite the fact that I had temporarily said no, I do not require a night in the watch house. In spite of this, the first bouncer expressed his regret by saying, "Look, I've seen some things over the years working clubs, but that is one of the coldest and most underhanded ways to break up a marriage I have ever seen. For what it's worth, I'm sorry." I waved away the sympathy with a wave. "I think I'll just go home and change the locks," I responded. "Mate, don't let the 304 back into the house until you have to," the second bouncer added. "Don't worry about it. I think I'll just go home." I smiled and raised one eyebrow at the same time. We continued our conversation for one more minute, and then I shook their hands before retiring to my vehicle and going home. During my journey back home, I made a pit stop at a Bunnings warehouse. I needed new locks and deadbolts, a number of moving boxes, and some packing tape, but I was able to get what I needed in a short amount of time despite the fact that it was late and they were still an hour away from closing. Immediately after arriving at my residence, I went through the motions of changing the locks and putting together the boxes. Several boxes stuffed with Jillian's belongings were in my possession within a short period of time. I poured myself a Kraken and a Coke before I started feeling the adrenaline of being so completely and utterly abandoned by my wife and supposed friends that I had to sit down. I was having to sit down because I was so upset. Following that, I turned on my laptop. Following the betrayal of my spouse, I opened our bank account and began engaging in the typical activities that one would do in such a situation. After blocking our joint credit cards, I went ahead and cancelled them. I opened a new account and moved half of our general savings and holiday accounts into the new account. I also opened a new account. Despite the fact that it would take a few days to clear, I was able to wait because I had a few $100s in cash. I got a second wind and opened our legal folder after the sugar from the Coke and the rum hit my system. I believe it was because of the combination of the two. There were a number of legal documents contained within it, such as the documents for the house, 2 of the investment properties that we had purchased, and the prenuptial agreement that we had drafted when we got married. It is now clear to me what you are considering. In it, there is a clause that addresses adultery. Not at all, you would be wrong to think that way. In most cases, the prenuptial agreement served to safeguard the assets that were held within my businesses. To put that into perspective, I had just begun my accounting business when we began dating and eventually got married. But when I was first starting out, I was fortunate enough to have a couple of good mentors who provided me with advice that would later become known as Sage. Together, we established the businesses that supported my practice under my sole name. The prenuptial agreement that Jillian and I signed stipulated that any and all other accounts, my business, and any and all subsidiaries would not be subject to any separation under any circumstances. Now that I have the benefit of hindsight, I am certain that Jillian readily agreed and that she did so because she was aware that she would probably betray me for her lover at some point in the future, but she was unaware of how much that would cost her. In spite of the fact that I ended up falling into a restless sleep that night, I was able to get a few hours of sleep before I woke up and made the decision to go out and eat breakfast by myself. After some time spent driving around, I was able to locate a fantastic Asian fusion restaurant that combined traditional Asian and Australian cuisines to create mouth-watering breakfast dishes. I was able to enjoy these dishes while I ate and drank an extra strong cup of coffee. To get ready for the divorce proceedings, I wrote a letter to a friend who works at one of the law firms that my company collaborates with. In the letter, I detailed what was going on and asked for their assistance. Within a half an hour, I received a call that was filled with disbelief. However, I proceeded to explain everything that had taken place to Mike. he assured me that he would be prepared to file on Monday morning and that he would direct me to someone within his company who could assist me. Without a doubt, he conveyed to me his sentiments of regret. I remained at the cafe for an additional hour. I was feeling a little sorry for myself and browsing the web on my laptop, but other than that, I didn't have much of an idea what I was doing. As soon as I arrived at my residence, I found Mark and Lena parked in the driveway. They exited their vehicle at the same time that I parked on the curb. Greg Weir, Lena had her first word. My hand was raised in front of her before she could proceed any further. The woman halted. Gregory, I prompted him. Sorry, Lena said once more. My name is Gregory. Only my friends get to call me Greg, I responded with complete silence. In an effort to establish a conciliatory tone, Mark began by saying, Listen, buddy, we are sorry for how last night went down. That is not how that happened. I extended my hand once more, and he instantly stopped, just like his wife had done. For a brief moment, I stared at a tree that was located on the opposite side of the road. One of the branches of a larger tree was severed as a result of a storm that occurred not too long ago. The branch had fallen onto a carport, but it had not caused any damage to the house. After a brief moment of staring at it, I realized that the metaphor of the tree losing a branch was a fitting one to describe how I was feeling at the time. The loss of Gillian was like having my arm severed altogether. My eyes were blazing with rage, and tears were streaming down my face when I turned around to look at Mark and Lena a minute later. My eyes were also filled with tears. Don't you dare, Mark. Don't you dare make excuses, I said to myself. You've known that 304 has been cheating on me behind my back for months, and you say nothing. In the beginning, Lena was going to say, but, Gregory, it's true. As I felt the warm tears continue to streak down my face, I finished by saying, Love, interrupting her during the conversation. Spare me the sanctimonious woman's true love speech. True love doesn't stab others in the back to get what it wants. True love is compassionate, it cares about what happens to those around them, not abandoning them or humiliating them with no warning and then rubbing it in their faces in front of an entire crowd. I thought what Gillian and I had was true love. I never doubted her. I worshipped the ground she walked on and loved her so much that I would have given her anything. To which Lena responded, I know, with tears beginning to well up in her eyes, but Gillian and Troy. Stop! I yelled, my rage exploding into a single word as it threatened to explode. My tears vanished all of a sudden. Stop, I said in a more subdued tone. Lena, I don't want to hear another word about Gillian and Troy. I don't want to hear another word about their love and how they're meant to be together. I just wasted the last several years of my life in a lie. 7 years, Lena. Years of being there for her as she struggled with self-identity issues. When she felt Troy abandoned her, years of encouraging her to grow beyond her limits. Years of intense period pain every month, and years of planning for a family. And let's not forget so many years of talking about growing old together. I've wasted years of nothing because I was only ever a plan B. But tell me, why, friend, I said with a strong emphasis on the word, why does the a-hole get to waltz back in after leaving her, while I've spent years investing in someone I loved without reservation? They looked at me as if I were a child who was completely clueless. I continued, the agony and pain exuding themselves in a torrent. He gets all of my hard work. He gets the woman I built up when he abandoned her. He gets all her friends that betrayed me. Before, she has true love. At least on the last statement, they had the decency to look ashamed. Well, screw that, I told them with great enthusiasm. She now gets what she deserves, and both of you were part of that, so get the hell off my property, Greg, said Mark in response. I gave a glare. Look, I get it. This is not what any of us thought would happen. We honestly thought Gillian and you would be happy forever. We thought you would have kids. But Troy came back, and we can all see how much they love each other. We know it sucks, but they deserve to be happy. I inquired of them, and what about me and my happiness at that moment? What do I deserve? They were at a loss for words with each other. I did a sigh. I'll tell you what I deserve. I deserve a loyal wife. I deserve friends who look out for me. But I get none of that. So screw you. I don't want your pity. None of you, including the 304, appear to care anything for me if it has any conflict with them. So if I appear bitter, it's because I am. However, put yourself in my shoes, I said in response. I turned my attention to Lena. Mark, when Lena finds her true love and leaves you for him, then you'll know how I feel. However, Mark firmly grasped Lena's arm, thereby minimizing her voice. Mark responded, everything is fine, Gregory. You've made your point, and you're not willing to see things from the other side. We're leaving. But as a last friendly gesture, is there anything we can do? After giving it some thought for a moment, I turned my attention to the minivan that they had parked in the driveway. Yes, wait here. Over the course of the subsequent few minutes, I brought out, or more accurately, I practically threw out several boxes that were packed with Jillian's personal belongings, including her clothes, her makeup, and her hair. When I threw the boxes in front of them, you could hear the fragile things breaking a couple of times throughout the process. Even though I saw them flinch, they did not say anything. I was considering simply leaving them in the driveway, but since you are here, you can just take them to the new home of the 304, wherever their love nest may be. But Jillian said she wanted the house, and you were going to move, Lena said. I was thinking of just leaving them in the driveway. Prior to her being able to utter another word, I laughed and silenced her by saying, it's not her house. She does not have ownership of it. She is going to discover that she is out of luck because, on the other hand, it does not belong to me either. Make it clear to the piece of garbage that she is not required to return to this location. The contents of those boxes are all that belongs to her. I would also like to inform her that the divorce documents will be mailed to her on Monday by my attorney. All of her belongings have already been removed, and I have removed myself from the accounts, therefore, whatever is left belongs to her. Lena began to finish her sentence by saying, "You're not even." "What is it?" When I asked, I was getting ready to fight. Hell no. This man has captured her heart. Over the course of several years, she has been dishonest with me regarding the source of her loyalty, and she has been cheating on me. I won't give her anything more or less than what is due to her, I'll give her what she deserves. To add insult to injury, I don't do sloppy seconds. The fact that there was not much more to say prompted me to watch them load the majority of the boxes into their van and drive away. I believe they were feeling a little bit of regret because they were aware that by supporting Jillian, they had lost my friendship. However, I was not present to witness their feelings of regret. That night, I got drunk and cried like a baby. I got angry and put my fist through a wall. That done, I smashed a vase that Jillian and I bought on holiday for our first wedding anniversary. I raged at being abandoned by my wife and friends and destroyed most of the lounge room. If it wasn't tied down, I threw it. If it was tied down, I used everything else to smash it to pieces. I punched more holes in the walls along the hallway, letting the seething anger I had manifest, tearing most of the doors off cabinets in the kitchen and even putting a couple of big dents in the fridge. I was hungover when I woke up in the morning, and I had a headache that seemed to last forever, bloody knuckles, possibly fractured hands, and scrapes all over my arms. I decided to put some bandages on my hands and arms, knowing that I would have to take myself to the doctor to get everything checked out. I surveyed the lounge room, noting that I would have to replace pretty much everything, as not a single piece of furniture had escaped my wrath. Along the hallway, ragged holes were spaced unevenly as I took out my frustrations on the unsuspecting walls. In the kitchen, there were cupboard doors strewn all over the floor and appliances leaning in positions where they would never operate correctly. I winced as I looked at the 3 big dents in the fridge, a vague memory of how at the time, the punches I threw at the sheet metal door felt so satisfying. In the dented fridge, I found some orange juice that only expired a couple of days ago. So, I grabbed a couple of Panadol and took a big drink. Within half an hour, the pulsing around the room had settled down, and I moved into the lounge room. I sat on the floor between broken chairs and gazed at the cracked TV. The rest of my day passed in a blur. I took myself to the doctor and got my arms looked at. Both my hands had hairline fractures, and they would need to be bound for a while so they healed. I got messages from a number of people, including Mark and Lena, but I didn't respond to any of them. I ended up heading to bed that night not having any idea if I did anything that day other than stare at the TV and go to the doctor. The next day was Monday, and I headed into the office at the usual time. My usual routine first thing was to run through emails from Friday, as well as anything that came in over the weekend, then prep for a 9 a.m. team meeting to plan everyone's actions throughout the week. I had a team of 15 people, and for the most part, we did good work. About 8:30, my office admin, an older lady in her 50s by the name of Colleen, came into the office. She took one look at me, pulled out a chair, and sat down. "That bad of a weekend, eh?" she asked, looking at the bindings over my hands and arms. I had never said a harsh word to her in the 3 years we had worked together, but when I glared at her, she gulped. "Gregory, I'm sorry." "It must have been bad. What happened?" she asked. I sighed and stared at my screen for a moment before taking my hands off the keyboard and turning to face my office administration. "Gillian left me for her true love," I admitted in a very expressionless voice. "What? No, you're making this up. Seriously, Gregory, don't," Colleen exploded. I held up my bandaged hands as I felt my eyes tear up. I shook my head. "It's true. I told her Friday night. We had that informal class reunion. It felt like all her classmates knew it was going to happen, that included Mark and Lena. They all knew that Gillian and Loverboy had been cheating behind my back for months. They all just chose to ambush me with the fact Friday night. With that, I broke down and cried for the first time since we met. Colleen came around the desk and hugged me. As she did, I could feel her own tears begin to fall on my shoulders. I told her how Saturday I got drunk and in a wild rage destroyed most of the furniture in the house, putting holes in the walls of at least half the house. I told her how I took myself to the doctor yesterday to get my hands bandaged, all the while nursing the hangover of the ages. By the time our morning stand-up came around, both of us had tried to dry our eyes as much as possible. Colleen ushered everyone into our big meeting room on time, and once they were seated, I came in and sat down. "I hope that everyone had a good weekend," I said, getting a number of nods around the room, but everyone was trying not to look at my bandages. "This week," I started to say, and Colleen interrupted this time, putting her hand up to stop us. "Sorry, Gregory, but I can't let this stand after what happened to you this past weekend. You can't pretend like everything is normal," Colleen stated. I hesitated for a moment and then nodded. Colleen looked at me again. The look told me she wanted to bring everyone into the loop, at least about the basics. After a moment's thought, I nodded permission, knowing that she would only share that which would be helpful. "Everyone, this past weekend, Gregory was betrayed by his wife and a number of friends. Gillian has been cheating on him for the last few months and decided to leave him in one of the most callous and disgusting ways possible, by humiliating him in front of a group of people, several of whom were supposed to be friends." Colleen stopped for a moment to let that sink in, then focused down on one person sitting almost hiding on the other side of the table. "Isn't that right, James?" Colleen asked. James Coulson was one of our CPAs. He was also one of Gillian's classmates, and I realized for the first time that both he and his wife had been there Friday night, witnessing the scene unfold. James hadn't said much to anyone since coming into the office, but when he saw me, he tried to be as inconspicuous as possible. When Colleen started talking, he paled. When she called him out, he tried to melt into the seat he was sitting in as every head in the room swiveled to focus on him. "James," she said. James looked down at the table in front of him. "I did," he said very quietly. For a moment, no one said anything. The air in the room was palpable until today. I would have thought everyone in the room had each other's back. Almost everyone in the room was bristling with an angry undertone directed at James. "All right, then, James," Colleen said after a few moments. "Right now, I think you need to leave the room. I think you need to think about your future with this firm, because if we find out that you supported Gillian at all in the events of this past weekend, you will be fired for cause. Do you understand?" He swallowed again, then stood. I understand, and tried to walk out of the room as quietly as possible. No one said anything. For the most part, I had forgotten that James was part of the room on Friday as everything happened. I cleared my throat. Everyone, I said, trying to bring us back to the moment. I'm not going to lie, my personal life sucks, and you can all guess that my weekend was not enjoyable. I held up my hands to emphasize the point. But we all have a job to do and clients to look after this week. I'm just going to trust that you all have each other's backs, and if you need anything specific, let Colleen know. I'll be here, but if we're all real about what's happening, I'm going to be a mess, so please bear with me. I almost cried again as everyone around the room poured out sympathy and words of support. Lastly, I said, this one is hard for me to say, but don't crucify James yet. I get that you're all angry, and James is an easy scapegoat, but let's spend some time and get the full story before we execute one of our own. I got a number of mumbles, but everyone agreed. Colleen ran the rest of the meeting for me. Then, breaking the meeting up, I headed back to my office and stared out the window. A few minutes later, Colleen knocked. Turning to the doorway, I saw her standing and waiting, a very chastened James standing right behind her. I ushered them in, and James appropriately closed the door behind him before taking the seat that Colleen pointed him to. I think you and James need to have a chat, Gregory, she said simply. I nodded, sitting down in my chair as James sat down on the other side of my desk. I kept staring out of my office window, my mind still a whirl of emotions. It was not even 10 in the morning, and I could do with a drink. James cleared his throat. I turned my eyes to him, and he looked down. So, I said, an accusation heavy in my voice. Gregory, he stopped, then laughed for a moment. Something funny? Colleen asked, just a hint of anger underneath her usual professional manner. James smiled at me, but it was an unhappy smile, sorrowful and full of grief. No, nothing is funny about this whole situation, James lamented. My boss is betrayed, our entire class is divided, and in addition to my wife screaming at me all day yesterday, I am about to lose my job. So no, nothing is funny. But I either laugh with a little gallows humor, or I cry. I smiled cautiously back at the guy. I always did like James, he was hardworking, and until this morning when Colleen brought him to my attention, I thought he would be with us forever. I smiled back. James, why don't you start from the top? I asked, trying to sound casual and supportive. He nodded, adjusting himself awkwardly in the chair he was sitting in. I suppose you have heard too many times now about how perfect Gillian and Troy were together in high school, he asked me. I nodded. In the past few days, I have heard nothing else but, I responded. He nodded. In high school, I was always a math geek. I wasn't bullied, but neither was I in the popular crowd. However, we all watched Gillian and Troy. They were the king and queen of our year. James looked at me for a reaction, getting none. He continued. When our final year was winding up and university placements were coming out, we all thought they would be going together. But the entire school was shocked when Troy announced he would be heading overseas without Gillian. Again, he paused. I nodded, I knew some of this story and wordlessly gestured for him to continue. Well, they broke up the week before school finished. Troy ended up going to a few parties, but Gillian never went. Over the break between the end of school and starting university, I saw Gillian twice. She looked broken and withdrawn. Then, a few months later, I heard from someone else that Troy was living it up in the States. He had a full-ride scholarship, thanks to his family, and the gossip was that he already had a girlfriend. I nodded again. I also heard this from Gillian. As I helped her stand up again during the getting-to-know-you phase of our relationship, she had cried into my shoulder a few times in the early days about how it hurt that Troy would abandon her and take on another girlfriend. It was on the back of one of these conversations that Gillian and I shared our first kiss, and I asked her out on a date. After that, Troy started to become a distant memory to Gillian. That is until recently, James continued, bringing me out of the memory. Well, I headed off to university myself, Got my degree, met and married Sherry, and felt fortunate to land a role here. His smile was a little bittersweet. I was surprised when I learned that you had married Gillian, James admitted honestly. I was pleased to see how happy she was with you. I mean, Troy leaving hurt her so much. To see that she landed with a good man that helped her land on her feet made me glad at the time. For a moment, James became lost in his own thoughts. So, when did you learn about Troy and Gillian's affair? I asked, surprised at the neutral tone of my voice. I think James was too, as he looked at me a little funny, as there was no hostility in it. About an hour before Gillian and yourself turned up for dinner, he said, dejectedly. A few of the class were talking. I picked up something about Gillian leaving you for Troy later that evening. My surprise registered on everyone's faces. I gave James a questioning look. He sighed. Until the dinner, only a handful of people knew anything, but everyone in the class got told that Gillian and Troy were supposed to be together. Mark and Lena pulled Sherry and me aside, telling us that it was happening, and while they felt sorry for you, that Gillian had made her choice and you just weren't a part of her future. I started to object. And that's when Mark recalled that I worked for you. He told me in no uncertain terms that if I said anything to you, I would regret it. He said that it was better that Sherry and I leave if I couldn't keep my mouth shut. I looked at James. The guy was truly hurting as he recalled the conversation. I could see a very embarrassed blush running up his neck, and I was also surprised to see his eyes were moist. I'm sorry, Gregory, we couldn't stay for dinner. Sherry wanted us to. She wanted us to be there for you, but Mark and a couple of the guys basically walked us out, telling us to stay away. James, I started to say, feeling for the guy. He held up his hand to stop me. Sorry, Gregory, I need to finish. I promise, Shia, I nodded yet again. I must admit I was stunned. He continued. I had just been ejected from my class reunion because your wife was about to betray you, and I was a loose end, though mad, we didn't know what to do. So, Sherry and I went straight to the club. Again, we both agreed we wanted to be there for you. What happened? I asked, my head cocked to the side. I didn't see you there. We were there, however. By the time you arrived, we were up the back. A couple of the guys blocked us from getting to you until Gillian told you. When you left, they let us go after a few minutes. Both Sherry and I ran after you, but by the time we made it out, you were gone. I think we must have stayed out in front of the club for about half an hour, stunned but not sure what to do. In the end, Sherry convinced me that we should go back inside and see what was happening. James paused, looking at me, trying to judge how much more to tell me. I nodded my head at him again, and he swallowed. When Sherry and I went back in, we were basically persona non grata to just over half the class. The other half was disgusted, and once they came to understand that I worked for you, they kind of surrounded me and my wife and didn't let anyone near us for the rest of the night. And I started, but just couldn't finish it. They danced and drank without a care in the world, James told me, swallowing even though I could tell his mouth was dry. I'm sorry, Gregory, but they acted like you were nothing. The few snippets of conversation that made it back over to us told us that this had been planned for months. It was worse when the gossip told us that Gillian and Troy are planning on getting married as soon as they can. James looked at the ground, then he held his hands tight in his lap. At home that night, we didn't sleep well. Sherry and I ended up fighting over everything yesterday, even though we were both repulsed by Gillian and Troy's behavior. Ultimately, this leads us to this morning, and this, James said, drawing a piece of paper out of his notebook and placing it on the table in front of me. What's this? I asked, picking up the page and reading the words quickly. My resignation, he said, defeated. I noted that it was signed and dated yesterday. James, I started. No, Gregory, he replied, it's wrong what they did to you, and I wasn't able to help you even though you have been an amazing boss and, dare I say, friend. You deserve more than that. Sherry and I agree it's better for me to resign than for you to see what happened to you Friday night every time you look at me. For a moment, we said nothing. I looked again at his resignation and laughed. Well, it was more like a bark than a laugh, but for the first time, I felt something other than sorrow and anger. Colleen and James looked at me. I pinched the page in the middle along the long edge and tore it in two. "Your resignation is rejected," I said. Behind us, I saw Ken smile. James looked shocked. "But, Gregory, why?" he was trying to say. "James, first off, my friends call me Greg. With what you just told me, I would like you to think of me as a friend. You tried to help and tried to warn me, but you couldn't. They were ready for you, but you're here and offering yourself as a sacrifice because you feel for me. If that's not a friend, nothing is." "James, I am hurt beyond reason," I explained. "I am both depressed and have a rage burning inside me that demands justice, but I am not blind. I can see from what you just told us that you were upset as well." James nodded. "Sherry and I thought it best, I know," I replied, "and that's one of the reasons I want Sherry and yourself to stay with us." For the next half hour, we talked in the office. Colleen, James, and I walked out of my office, calling everyone back into the meeting room. I explained how James was blindsided almost as much as me and was ejected from his own reunion because of the two cheaters. As I explained it and what had happened and what I wanted everyone to do, any animosity towards James disappeared. Indeed, by the time we all walked out, there were a few devious smiles on everyone's faces. For the rest of the week, I spent most of my time in the office. However, other than advising my staff on what they needed to be doing, I spent more of my time setting the wheels turning in my divorce. I didn't end up mailing the divorce, I had Gillian served at work. It didn't matter as adultery is not a binding factor in Australian divorces. I still made sure that my lawyers, Mike and his associate Sally, included the statement of adultery clearly on the legal documents. After she got the documents, I got a few calls and text messages from Gillian, which I didn't delete but promptly ignored. I assumed they would be angry messages, so I let them pile up on my phone. I busied myself with managing bank accounts, asset listings, validating cancel cards, insurance, that sort of thing. My team sorted through my legal documents and made sure everything was up to date and that Gillian couldn't touch a thing. Colleen made a point to drop by my place on Tuesday evening with a meal and gasped more than once at the destruction throughout my house. The tears that she cried as she walked room to room could have left a trail that Hansel and Gretel could follow. On Wednesday morning, Colleen got onto my insurance agency and started arranging an assessment of the damage. I don't know how she did it, but by Friday, she had managed to arrange assessors and cleaning crews for my house. Everything would start happening the following week. By Friday night, I was exhausted, both physically and mentally, but I still wasn't sleeping well. So, Saturday morning, with no work, I rose early and took myself for a run. I ended up running down to our local shops and sitting at a cafe, where I enjoyed coffee and a croissant before jogging home. A couple of hours later, arriving back at the house, I was surprised to find Gillian sitting on the front steps, waiting for me. I had not seen her since the Friday when she left me. She was dressed casually in jeans, sneakers, and a casual blouse, but the shirt and shoes were mismatched. It appeared the lover boy didn't help her with her appearance. I stopped about halfway up the driveway, a thin sheen of sweat covering my body as I pulled my earphones out. Anti-Sleep by Blue Shell blasted out until I silenced the loud music. If you're ever after some music to help the rage, check it out. For a moment, neither of us said anything. "Greg, it's good to see you," Gillian started saying. I suddenly spat a ball of phlegm out of the side of my mouth onto the grass, stopping her mid-sentence. "What?" I replied, with a pause. "You're surprised that I'm looking after myself after my cheating, 304 of a wife betrayed me in front of an entire group of people, afraid that I would have killed myself because you tore my heart out with no warning, worried I might be lying in a puddle of my own vomit, so drunk because you screwed me over so badly that I couldn't function." I glared at her, and Gillian had the good grace to take a half step back and pale just a little. "It wasn't like that, Greg," she paused. I almost yelled at her, interrupting the usual cheater spiel of excuses. For a moment, she did nothing, and then just nodded her head. "Like I believe that, Gillian. You purposely," and I do mean purposely, lined everything up to very specifically tell me you were leaving me in front of people I thought were friends. You purposely set out to destroy me." She looked at her feet. "Greg, it wasn't my idea to do it that way," she said quietly. "Mark and Troy thought that if we did it that way, you wouldn't try to fight it." I threw my head back and laughed. "You have got to be joking," I said bitterly as I settled myself down. "I mean, we've known each other for years, would have been married 5 years soon, and you thought when I found you had been running around on me, or that you were going to leave me, that I would try to fight for you. Your used holes ain't worth a fight." Jillian blushed. "But no buts," which, I spat at her. "You gave up any demand for my attention or defense the moment you spread your legs for that a-hole. It just took a while for me to find out. However, now it's out in the open, you can screw off." "Greg, that's no way to talk to me." "I mean, I am still your wife," Jillian retorted, some anger now creeping into her voice. "Ha, some wife you are. You are a public toilet now, anyone can open his fly and do business in you," I said as I started walking up the drive and past her to the front door. I pulled my keys and unlocked the door as I walked in. Jill made to walk in behind me until I put a hand up and stopped her. "You're not invited in," I told her without ceremony. "But Greg, it's still my house too," she sputtered. I shook my head. "No, it's not. It never was. The house belongs to the trust, and my wage paid a rental fee each month towards the trust." She looked at me, not understanding. "Look, Jillian, it's not your house anymore. You don't live here. But wait here, I have a few things for you," and I closed the door behind her. As I walked into my study, I sent a quick message to my lawyer letting her know that Jillian was there. I picked up a couple of things and walked back to the front door. Jillian was still standing there. "Greg, she started saying. I held up my hand in the universal sign for shut the hell up. "Firstly, it's Gregory. I told you, only my friends get to call me Greg, and you certainly are not a friend," Jillian swallowed. "Second," I said, handing her a small binder, "in here is a check for your half of our marital assets." Her eyes went wide. The impact of the check she suddenly held in her hand told her more than the divorce paperwork that we were through. "Third, I'm told you have something for me." She looked uncertain for a moment, then opened her handbag, pulled out a manila envelope, and handed it to me. "I'm sorry, Greg. I mean, Gregory." "You will be," I said cryptically. I opened the envelope with her standing there and leafed through the first few pages. I snorted and looked up at her. Jillian blushed, knowing I was reading that in response to my divorce petition, she wanted 75.5% of our savings and 50% of my business. I leafed through to the back and then came up against the next document, which was a restraining order that would go into effect Monday, barring me from the house or from knowingly being within 100 meters of Jillian or Troy. "Really?" I asked, eyebrows raised. At that moment, she couldn't look me in the eyes. She knew that everyone had gone too far to be honest. Jillian had always gone with the flow. Now it was going to hurt her much worse than she ever thought. I pulled out my phone and called my divorce lawyer. I stood staring at Jillian as she pawed the ground with her feet. Sally, Mike's associate and my now divorce lawyer, picked up on the second ring. "Hi, Sally. I have Jillian standing in front of me, in front of my house, and aside from her demands responding to the divorce petition, she is presenting me with a restraining order that, in addition to staying away from her and the stain, includes my house, in which she no longer lives." As I listened to Sally swear like a sailor, I watched Jillian turn a few shades of red, as she could clearly hear the cursing on the other end of the line. Sally would deal with it and tell me what to do, so I said, addressing Jillian as I hung up, "How does it feel to be one of the most despicable human beings on the face of the planet, Jillian?" For a moment, she said nothing. "It's not like that, Gregory," Jillian replied quietly. "I convinced Troy that we should give you until Monday to move out so that we could move in." I laughed. "You can't move in, it's not your house," I said, restating the fact. "But you can't be here," she retorted, somewhat petulant like a 5-year-old not getting their way. I shrugged my shoulders. Perhaps. And trust me, this disgusting trick will backfire. But just because I can't be here doesn't mean that you and Shitstain can be. Now, I think it's time you left, Jillian. I'd wish you well, but I would be lying. You hate me that much? She asked, looking at my bandaged hand but not asking the question. You seriously have the gall to ask me that after doing what you did and now serving me with this paperwork? I responded to her, like she was the dumbest person on the planet. At this point, I wasn't sure she wasn't in the running. She waited, not saying anything. Jillian, you were my everything. You were my best friend. There was no one else in this world that I trusted more than you. Then, in one fell swoop, you rip that away and treat me no better than the gum you scrape off your shoe. You have become a thorn in my eyes. So tell me, oh wise one, at what point through doing this to me and ripping my life away did you think that my love wouldn't turn into instant malice and hatred for you? I folded my bandaged hands across my chest. Jillian's eyes went wide at my use of such language. For a few moments, she fiddled with her hands and looked up at me. I had hoped. She paused and took a breath. Gregory, you're right. We did have a lot of good years together. But the restraining order is only until the divorce is complete and everything settles down. Mark, Lena, myself, and even Troy are hoping that we could one day be friends when things settle down. I snarled and exploded. Friends? She shrank back as my damaged arms dropped the envelope and moved in an expressive fashion. You have got to be kidding me. Friends? I spat. If any of you were on fire, I would drink a liter of petrol to piss on you and make sure you burned extra crispy. Friends? You are one delusional brain. I exclaimed, again noting movement behind her. Mark and Lena were moving quickly up the drive. I saw the a-hole himself standing back at the curb. It looked like they had gotten out of a large truck on the other side of the street when I exploded at Jillian. Oh, look here come our friends now, I hissed, glaring at them. Greg, Mark said, coming up behind Jillian, settle down, mate. You don't need to screw off. I shot back at him, we are not mates, friends, or even friendly associates anymore. Your betrayal is almost as bad as the 304s, so don't you think that you can say anything that will help here? I glared at the couple that had set Jillian and me up, then actually participated in our destruction. Both of your hands are as dipped in blood and as guilty as this woman and the scum-sucker over there. I gestured to the man who had taken my wife, but didn't even have the balls to come up the drive and defend her. Greg, Lena said, trying to sound firm. My glare and I turned to her. Don't you dare, Lena. There is no moral high ground for you to stand on here. You actively helped my wife to cheat on me. Both of you did, I said, now gesturing to Lena and Mark. Both of you helped to set up that scene in the club to cause me maximum humiliation. They stopped and stood. I could see Lena start to open her mouth. I interrupted, and don't you dare start giving me a true love, you tried that last time, don't forget. Both of you introduced this 304 to me and encouraged me to date and marry her. Then both of you betrayed me so casually, without a second thought. If this is what you think love is, then burn the world to ashes now, because there is no hope for society if either of you is an example. They looked at me, startled, at the spit flying from my face. I stopped, and a light bulb went off. Lena, do you forgive Mark after he gets home smelling like perfume after being at a strip club all night? I said, smiling, my tone losing the anger and gaining a condescending edge. Lena stopped, eyes going wide, then looking at Mark. Baby, that's not true, Mark tried to say. I laughed, and they all looked at me. Well, no, it's not the way Mark likes to tell the story with the boys. It's that only the front room is a strip club. For an extra 500, you can get an extra special lap dance in the back room, and condoms are only an extra 20. I watched with satisfaction as Mark began to object, but Lena could sense the truth. Or so he tells us during a round of golf, I finished, again crossing my hands over my chest, again satisfied at their own pain. Mark took a step back, and a moment later, he was running down the road, his wife chasing him and screaming at him. I looked over to Troy, the bystander, looking in wonder. Then back to Gillian, a self-satisfied smirk on my face. Greg, I glared at her as she said my name. I mean, Gregory, you didn't have to do that, she said. I sneered and leaned forward. Oh, don't worry, Gillian, I watched as her ears went back. I am sure a tremor of worry went up her spine as I used her name. That is only the opening salvo. Mark has many more secrets to tell, and in this tale of woe, Mark and Lena will only receive a portion of my wrath. The rest I reserve for the portrayers of true love. I smiled at her as I could see her physically shiver this time as my words penetrated her selfish mind. What do you mean? Gillian asked. Leave now, Gillian, I said, changing the topic, not directly addressing her statement. Tell Troy to take you. Run away, preferably out of this country with you, because if you don't, neither you nor him will like what's coming. Greg, what's wrong with you? Where is the man I love? She asked, not realizing what she said until it was too late. He's dead, I replied flatly. You tore my heart and soul from me, and the remaining hole has given birth to something new, something dark, and something that will enjoy what's coming. With that, she wasn't sure what to say. I took a moment to take a dramatic step backward and slammed the door shut while giving one of those laughs that the bad guys in movies always give. I peered out 10 minutes later, and Gillian, along with Troy and the truck, were gone. I sat down on the floor, my limbs shaking at the confrontation, and again broke down. I loved her, but I hated her. I wanted to see her shattered and remorseful, regretting that she had betrayed me. As I sat on the ground crying for what we once had, tears filled with rage and disgust. The next month was full of the usual things, lawyers, financial disclosures, and the who gets what of divorce. At work, the team rallied around me. Colleen helped me find a psychologist, and I met with him twice a week to begin working through the feelings I had. I moved into a short-term apartment. Actually, it was a good thing, as I couldn't be in the house. Colleen worked with the clean-up crews and builders to clean out the house of broken furniture and appliances, and then repair the damage. Despite her initial statement saying she wanted a clean split, Gillian ended up wanting to fight over a lot. First of all, it was our bank accounts. We only had $20,000 split between 3 accounts, and she was claiming over $15,000 of that was hers. Next was the house and investment properties. When we got married, I already had the place we were living in, having just over-leveraged myself for the business. Over the years, we found it was a smart move. We quickly paid back the extra loan, and we also made some investments to purchase 2 additional properties. She had contributed to some of the improvements over the years, but all 3 houses belonged to a trust for which neither of us was a direct beneficiary. She tried to fight it with lawyers I assumed were paid for by her lover, but it was useless. All of the properties were out of reach for her. I did smile that she had lost the ability to get any return on those investments. Next, it was furniture and jewelry. I noted through my lawyer that all of her belongings were packed in boxes that were delivered to her. I provided a list, including shoes, earrings, and necklaces that were provided in the boxes I packed for her. My last thought was that Gillian made the claim on half my business, citing that she believed she was due to half since we had been together right after I started the business. Sally viciously outlined the terms of the prenup and even got a chance to give Gillian a moral lecture, stating she got nothing of other accounting. In the end, she got $10,000. I would say she spent most of that on lawyers. I wasn't happy, but it did give me some satisfaction that she walked away with so little while I got to keep my houses and my business, which were worth substantially more. Sally also put some icing on the cake by somehow getting Gillian to give up both her wedding and engagement rings. The restraining order was dropped since Gillian had no claim to the house. She couldn't get in anyway, as the locks were changed, and I had a security company pass by the house a couple of times each week. Before I moved back in with the final term set, we had a couple of months to wait for the divorce to be final. I didn't hear much from Gillian, however. James and Sherry got a lot of questions from those from the reunion that they were still speaking to, and they both firmly asked everyone to off. James did learn that Gillian and her lover were residing in an apartment in town provided by the company he works for. He had a 6-month lease and then either had to pay for it himself or find another place. Putting 2 and 2 together, it appeared he thought that by getting together with Gillian, he would have a ready-made house. Too bad, pig. The next surprise came in August. It was a couple of weeks from the divorce being final, and it was now into tax season. Here in Australia, there are a few busy times for accountants throughout the year for small businesses. August and September are the busiest, as they want to get their taxes done and refunds sorted out as quickly as possible. We didn't do a lot of small business tax, but over the years, we had done some favors for friends. I was surprised when one of those businesses was waiting for me on Tuesday morning. I never thought I would see their faces. "Gregory, come on, man, you got to help me out," Mark was pleading, sitting across the table in one of our meeting rooms. Lena was sitting beside him, eyes downcast. With just one glance, I could tell their relationship was quite strained, which I assumed was a result of our last meeting. "Why?" I asked, enjoying their discomfort. Beside me sat James. For the past few years, both James and I had done the taxes for Mark's import-export business. It was a complex setup, making sure that the correct filings were done, offsets and revenue reductions worked through. We got paid well for it, and sure, Mark could go somewhere else, but it would cost him a lot more, and it would take a few years for another accountancy to get to know his business. "Really? You're really going to make me beg, Gregory?" Mark said, his voice pleading. I laughed. James smiled. "Well, begging would be a nice touch, but ultimately useless. What I am curious about is why you're here. I mean, all of you planned to humiliate me. You made excuses and cared nothing for my feelings, while you all coddled and made lovey-dovey noises at Gillian and Scumpsucker, telling me to get over myself. Well, I have gotten over myself, and I decided that I want nothing to do with any of you. Can you not believe that choice?" No one said anything for a minute. "You were right, you know," Lena said quietly. When no one said anything, I raised an eyebrow at her statement. "Meaning?" I asked. For a moment, Lena looked at Mark, a shadow passing across her face. I was surprised at the anger, but then it passed to be replaced by sorrow. Mark looked down at his hands, saying nothing about the strip club, the back room. "You were right," she said sadly. The surprise must have shown on my face. When Mark bragged about it, I thought it was just him over-exaggerating the story, being a storyteller. When I told Lena about what Mark had said, I did it to cause them some pain. I didn't think it was real. "Wow, really? So, Mark, you were telling the truth?" I asked, a little incredulously, to my former friend. He looked up at me for a moment before popping his head back down and nodding. I looked to Lena, an eyebrow raised. "You were right, Gregory." And not just about Mark's behavior, she told James and me. While Mark kept his head down, Lena continued, "You were right about it all. We got so caught up in the romance that Troy and Gillian were selling us on that we never really thought about you." I went to reply, and Lena shook her head. "For the first time, I held my tongue that day when you told us about Mark. For a few seconds, I thought you were just trying to upset us, but then I saw the look in his eyes, and I knew you were telling the truth." "But you didn't know it was true, did you?" Lena asked me. I shook my head and snorted. "Figures," she paused, then looked at me. I was surprised to see sadness there, and that it was aimed at me. "I think we all knew you would hurt Gregory when he came back. And then a few others brought it to us. We all knew that it was wrong and buried ourselves in the illusion that it was true love and lied to ourselves that it was right. It turns out that some of the more vocal people, like my husband," she said, ruefully, "they were easing their own guilty conscience by telling the rest of us you would be all right to hide their own cheating." I looked at the broken couple. Mark couldn't look any of us in the eyes, and Lena was on the verge of breaking down. "And now?" I asked simply.